Before we get started, just a quick note about something you hear at the end of the show. In the credits, I mentioned that Nate Schweber does the music. And don't worry, he still does, but I wanted to tell you that he's got a new album out. It's called Gaps, and it's available for download or in handy CD format, and I invite you to check out nateschweber.bandcamp.com to listen to snippets and to add it to your musical collection. Thanks for supporting independent musicians. And now, here's that familiar Nate tune to get us started. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer. It's the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint, and I'm John Holl. This week, I've dialed up Jeremy Marshall, the brewmaster at Lagunitas Brewing Company. So strap in, because we're going to take this roller coaster on all the turns, dips, loops, and drops. But first, a reminder to check out beeredge.com and to sign up for the newsletter. Check out more on this podcast on the website, as well as the podcast hosted by Andy Crouch. And please connect with our social media at The Beer Edge, wherever you get your social medias. Despite being one of the largest breweries in the country, I hadn't given Lagunitas much of a thought in recent years. I'd of course see its IPA on tap when I went to bars, back when I went to bars, and its familiar glass bottles are ubiquitous on shelves. It was there, I was happy to see it, but I usually ordered something else or grabbed something else to go. And a lot of people are drinking the beer, sure, but as the beer landscape and the conversation has shifted to local in recent years, some of the middle-tier breweries that we've long known and just kind of taken for granted have been making big moves. So when the new press representative for the brewery, which has been wholly owned by Heineken for the last 3 years, reached out, I thought it would be smart to check in and to see where the brewery is and where it's looking to go. Jeremy Marshall, the brewmaster, has been with the company for most of his brewing career and has seen the company grow from its once modest Petaluma, California home base to Chicago to overseas, as well as even a small brewery in Seattle. Under his watch, the brewery has grown from about 21,000 to over 1 million hectoliters. They are Dutch, so they use hectoliters, not barrels, in their reporting. Because of his longevity, he's seen the brewery mature over the years, from the days of it being shut down by the feds because of a joint, to now looking into the non-alcoholic beer space. Of course, marijuana is still part of the culture of the company, and its infused cannabis beverages are growing in popularity. But you'll hear why he doesn't think a full THC and alcohol hybrid is part of a likely reality. He spoke to me from the brewery in California, and we started off by, what else? COVID. Here's our conversation. What kind of year has it been?
Dumpster fire. You wanted it in 2 words or less, right?
Sure.
Uh,
That's what makes for great radio, is super short answers.
Super short answer, man. It's been a dumpster fire, but it's also been, I think, a year of reckoning for not just Lagunitas, but also a lot of craft, because when the proverbial poop hit the fan, and I like to use this analogy, we were in wiping down our groceries mode when none of us knew what was going on. There was a lot of real fear about our industry, and thinking, oh no, are people gonna not buy these relatively expensive and flavorful beers? Are people gonna trade down? Is it gonna be all about cheap handlebars, and everyone's going to go into ration mode, and it's going to be like some form of what we might have heard about during some crazy country in the 80s, and we didn't know what was going on. And then we pivoted, and we very, very quickly realized, hey bud, your draft is gone. I mean, the on premise is talk about a very seismic shift, and just feeling really, really terrible. I mean, we obviously have a lot of deep relationships with a lot of places, and reaching out to them all the time, and it's just like terrible. But at the same time, those of us who were lucky enough to have packaging lines, and then furthermore, lucky enough to maybe have access to some form of can, even if that's just a crowler. Because remember, even crowlers were, the supply chain was really interesting, because it appears that it failed everywhere and has still failed, but except for beer, right? Beer has done a great job of keeping the supply chain going. And for craft breweries, we had to very, very quickly shift our package and do things to stay afloat. Like I alluded to, it's no, you can't pick on anybody that's a craft brewer for making a craft seltzer anymore. You could a year ago, but you can't now. People just got to do what they got to do to survive. And I think it's forcing a lot of really interesting and cool innovations as well. Not just another 25,000 New England IPAs that have all kinds of amazing, cool hops in them. That trend has strengthened, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we're seeing a lot of other, cool stuff. Even innovation within what I would call interesting in 1990s craft beer. So
Yeah, what does
your
that
old
mean?
school. I got a brown ale, I got a porter, I got a Dortmunder lager. All these what craft beer looked like decades ago. You're even seeing uh, people doing that again. So I don't think that it's been challenging, but I don't think that it's been terrible for beer overall.
You mentioned the supply chain, and there's a lot of conversation that's happening around aluminum cans right now, and people are starting to get worried about a crunch. And some of the manufacturers have said, "Okay, we're going to build some plants, and we're going to meet demand as best we can." But I think some of the smaller breweries out there are starting to get a little panicked as to whether or not they're going to be able to get their Crowler cans or get their 12 or 16-ounce cans as they were. The thing that I was struck about when I was visiting Lagunitas.com before we started recording was I always thought of you all as a bottled beer brewery, and still do to this day. And I know you're canning your beers, but right on the front page, IPA and a little something are both featured in bottles. And I'm wondering if that has been a benefit for you guys in the last couple of months as people have been talking about can shortage, is that, you have had both lines, and people think of you in glass bottles, and they don't necessarily seem to mind that.
Well, yeah, that's true. I think that if you really kind of dig into it, I mean, I personally have it's taken me some time to warm up to the can, but I can really see the advantages. But when I want to have a really nice beer, I pour it into a glass. So I like to think that what do you drink your beer in? Well, I usually pour it into a glass. So what package format is going to resonate more with you? Well, I'm probably going to like glass. But now let's play devil's advocate, right? Glass is heavy. You can fit way more cases into a truck in cans than you can glass.
Mm-hmm.
Before the supply constraint of cans, which I would argue was already happening before the pinch of nobody being able to go out anymore, and instead everybody is enjoying a nice beer on their home patio, and so that put a lot of sudden strain. But the shift was already kind of happening, and of course, if even though I just told you I really prefer glass because I like to pour my beer into a glass, so
Right.
therefore, if your beer's in a bottle, it's only touching glass,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. So it's kind of just a perfect vessel. But then you also got to play the other side of that. Well, okay, this may be less likely to get recycled. It's heavier. Obviously, if it falls on the ground, it does something different than what happens if a can falls on the ground. But the really thing is the economic incentive about how much more you can fit into a truck and what that means to somebody's business. I think that was driving it, along with the fact that the can is the thing that can go anywhere. So
Yeah.
that those undertones were already strengthening, and I think that uh, not just beer, but let's just say like beverages overall were kind of already transitioning from heavy, expensive glass bottles into cans, and then fast forward to February of this year, then it just like accelerated that trend. But me personally, I walk into a nice taqueria, I look down, I always see that glass bottle Coke, and
Hmm.
that's what I want. I don't even notice the can. And sorry for plugging a beverage there, but I just, there's something about that glass bottle that speaks to me.
No, I'm sure you get a nickel every time you do the product placement, I imagine.
Oh man, I wish. We'll see. We'll see.
Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. But as far as for some breweries, and I'm thinking of like the smaller ones in America right now. There really isn't an option to go back and forth between bottles and cans. So most, in fact, pretty much all of them have gone to cans exclusively.
Hmm.
You all being a larger size, and I think the larger the brewery, the more there's a benefit of having, the options, because there's going to be people who can get the same beer in a can or in a bottle, and they're going to have a preference, and that's what they're going to stick with. But from the way that you're sort of describing this, do you think there's a day in the nearish future, where Lagunitas won't be coming in 12-ounce bottles anymore?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because if you follow the trends, you could perhaps make a graphical representation of that. And is it 10 years? I wouldn't say it's like 5 years, but say is it 10 years? Is it 20? But remember, just like shortages, like can shortages, and I'll never forget the hop shortage of 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the way things work in the world is giant pendulums that swing from one end to the other. So the romantic side of me would like to believe that just when we think bottles are dead out there, they're going to make a uh, a exciting and unexpected renaissance. Where they become popular again. What I don't know about is will we ever see the uh, the 22-ounce bottle, the so-called bomber
Yeah.
format. Will we see that make a comeback? I don't know, but I always like to bet on the underdog. That's my thing. So,
Well, I mean, drinking habits have changed so much as well, and I mean, you're hard pressed to find 22s these days.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They're
And
they're
if you're trying to
they're a
sell them, you're hard
dinosaur.
pressed to even make the sale, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a dinosaur, and unfortunately, our culture has moved increasingly towards uh, single serving and convenience,
Why do you say
and kind of one
unfortunately?
and done. So,
Why
you
do you
know,
say unfortunately that we've
oh,
moved?
it's overall not just our industry, but it just leads to more trash. So think about like packets of this and you know lots of individually packed things. It's great for convenience. You grab it on the go. If you've got kids, you live in this world of convenience packed, non-resealable.
Hmm.
Then you kind of take a step back and you look at all that trash, and you think, oh, that's the unfortunately.
I was sort of wondering, just because of the social aspects as well. Like, I remember getting 22s of big boozy imperial stouts or triple IPAs 2 decades ago, and you'd have bottle shares with friends, which I guess isn't going to happen anytime soon until there's a vaccine and we're all back out in the world again. But it also seems like there's sort of a bit of a, I don't know, the lost art of sharing with friends kind of thing.
Well, I wouldn't get too been out of shape over that because I can tell you that at least at our tap room. So we Chicago is unfortunately all indoors, so
Yeah.
it's closed. But Petaluma and Seattle have outdoor space, and we've noticed a pretty stark and drastic rise in growlers and crowlers.
Hmm.
And those are even larger format than a 22. You're talking 32 here, or it's even more. And patrons are finding something that they like in a sampling environment, and they're saying, "I'd like to have that again on my deck." And they're buying one or two. And I seriously doubt that they're gonna have that all alone. So it's gonna be with their family, with their everybody kind of created a little bubble. Like these are my peeps, and we're all gonna exchange microbes with one another, and then they live in that little bubble. So they have that little bubble over. whatever it is, and they're still drinking those large formats.
The nature of beer recipes have sort of changed, though, as well. And we've seen, I think, the general trend overall, especially when it's coming from some of the larger breweries, is thinking about smaller beers, smaller calorically, smaller ABV wise. There's been sort of a bent towards general health conscious as well. I don't think I've seen too much from you all about that, but I'm sort of curious as to when you were talking earlier about innovation, if you see, you know, the new healthier trend in beers, and I use air quotes with healthier, um, as innovation that interests you.
Um, I mean, I don't know. A trend, right? It's kind of a it's kind of an interesting thing. You know, we're in the beverage alc space. We're not allowed to make health claims, so I do view with suspicious eye, you know, anything that's like brewed with, you know, superfoods and has all this, you know, great stuff in it, or you know, very low carbs. I mean, every brewer, every home brewer listening, you know, if you strip all the carbs out of your beer, you have a less interesting beer. You know, it gets thin, and part of the greatness of beer is the the beautiful grain that we use, and the carbohydrate profile that you get from using barley and wheat and rye and oats. It leaves this amazing silky texture, and these amazing long chain polysaccharides like arabinoxylan from wheat, for instance, and pentosan from, you know, there's all this stuff at play that to me is the beauty of beer and the beauty of that mouthfeel, especially once you link it up with some really amazing hops. It just becomes sublime. So if you take all the carbs out of that, if you kind of, you know, take it down to this thing that we're going to say you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just you know, I don't know. You know, if I'm wanting to be healthy, I'm going to drink a bottle of water, or I'm going to have something that's got no, you know, none of that in it, right? So um, if I'm feeling a little bit more frisky,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go in between. You know, our big thing. You know, you kind of alluded to, or you made me think of a beer that we made, Daytime,
Mm-hmm.
which when it came out, we called it a fractional IPA. And it was one of the first in early so-called session IPAs, but it was a nod to the fact that, hey, you know, we're making Waldo and Maximus and all these, you know, giant double and triple IPAs. And then our regular IPAs, Lagunitas IPA is 6.2%, little something something is like almost 7.5%. It was like we need something that is uh, a little bit less, but
Yeah.
in craft brewing, there was always this belief that less is never more, that less is in fact less. So our philosophy was like, well, let's you know, jam a ton more juicy hops in there. Let's really turn the hops up to make up for that lack of alcohol. And then if you follow that philosophy, you know, down towards hoppy refresher, and then, you know, now we're working on IPNA, but we still got Waldo, Maximus, Supercluster. The idea is you have a spectrum of IPAs, so it's
Yeah.
like an IPA for everyone, anytime is kind of what we're going for. So even I hate to say it, but this is completely legal. I have a 4-year-old, and he loves hoppy refresher, and sometimes when I watch him drinking that, I'm like, am I doing something bad here? Am I like making a future IPA drinker? And I'm like, hell, it's got no alcohol, zero. You know, it's just dry. It's dry hopped water, which sounds completely silly, and it kind of, you know, it sounds like a joke, but you know, the Germans have been making, because of like also during Prohibition, there were all kinds of like alternative
Oh yeah. Hop
beverages, you know,
tonics
hop
and yeah.
sodas and things like that. You know, The Germans have been doing that for years.
I'm trying to think that there's probably some sort of old saying of fathers don't let your sons grow up to be IPA drinkers or something like that, but that doesn't seem like it's.
Well, you know what's really funny? Back when the craft brewing was kind of foisted as like us versus them, like the small little scrappy craft brewers who came from home brewers, because
Mhm.
that's what I was before I got into this. I was a home brewer versus the big evil, you know, big beer.
Yeah.
I used to worry that like you don't drink what your dad drinks. So like my dad drank, bland, you know, like Pabst and Coors and just kind of Budweiser. He drank the mass produced stuff that
Yeah.
my craft brewing friends told me in the early days was like those are the bad guys. And I used to say, well, hell, I only drink super flavorful IPAs. Oh no, is my son gonna revert and be a lager beer drinker? But now I would argue it's kind of a moot point because the whole thing got thrown into a blender and became a smoothie, and now it's like I feel like the whole us and them thing is like uh, it's not as relevant now as it was because the saga has played out. You know
So,
what I mean?
so I mean that's a pretty good segue because my dad actually drank Heineken, and we used to have green bottles in the fridge growing up, and I remember that fondly as it were. That's the parent company of Lagunitas now, and
hmm
when you're saying do you think the era of us versus them is over, and is it easy to say
I
that
don't
because
think
like
it's.
you're
I wouldn't say it's over. I just think it's a moot point. I think that we made it in the book to the chapter that told us what was going to happen. So now we're all writing the next chapter together. And at first it was probably very, very scary. Like I'll never forget. I was around like Goose Island when that was like a big deal, right? When
yeah
that first, and then it was like kind of quiet for a long time. You remember? I mean, there was some other movements and things, but it went, and then during the Renaissance period, which I really like to kind of define the Renaissance period as of about 2008 until about 2015, which would mark when we did the 50-50 JV. But that was when craft brewing was like, I
and
mean, I
that's the
could
joint
tell you
venture with
from,
Heineken. Yeah.
yeah, that's when we did our JV in 15. But that time period also marked when there was a lot of activity with between bigger brewers and
Sure,
smaller
there's a
brewers.
lot of merger and acquisitions happening at
Yeah, it
around that
became like
point.
it
Yeah.
became like every day you would read the racks and there would be another one, and it was almost like you became desensitized to it. You know what I mean? And that has continued till this day, albeit it's kind of slowed down recently. But it became so common that I would say that it's really no longer an us and them. Um, the idea is you think that uh, that sometimes the big and powerful gobble up the small, and there's like assimilation. But the thing is sometimes you end up with somewhere in between the reverse of that. So it's like you kind of like benefit off of one another. So like a good example is like uh, we brew Lagunitas in Netherlands now. That would have never happened before, and I like they flew us out there to help them brew our beer. And I was looking at a little sign that said when this building became a brewery, and it said 1340 or something like that. This
Yeah.
building had been brewing beer since 1340, and I'm like, these guys want to have us show them how to do something like what the and then I realized it's the big lager brewers have they don't it's I don't want to say they don't have the love affair with hops that the craft brewers and the IPA brewers have. It's just that they don't think about hops in the way that we do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've rekindled an old love affair, and you get to see it happen. It's actually kind of cool to watch these guys open up a bag of Simcoe and smell that for the first time. I mean, it's amazing. See, this smile that comes across the face is like, wow, like we've never really realized, and this is why the New England IPA or the hazy IPA movement is not losing steam; it's gaining steam. It's because there's so much you can do with hops. There's so many flavors and aromas that you can get from hops
Yeah.
that would otherwise, be found in nature in the form of terpenes. And there's so many, terpene is just an aromatic messaging compound that between plants and animals. It might say to an animal, like a really stinky cannabis plant is maybe saying, don't eat me. My seeds are not ready yet. They're not ready to be spread. And then it might, change and then it's saying, eat me. It's either warding off or inviting in. Just, like how a really attractive flower is kind of like a marketing campaign,
Right.
hello, hello kind of thing. And so hops really, I think, encompass this really amazing spectrum of nature where you can get any kind of tree aroma, if it's a pine or a cypress or a eucalyptus, which eucalyptus is like amazing because it smells like a body odor and chocolate and mint all at the same time. It's its own thing, right? And so I love
I don't know if
hops
you're
that are,
selling that, but yeah.
well, I don't work for the eucalyptus guild, but you can get like anything that you can find in nature. You can get like now there's a hop HBC 492, I believe it is, that you dry hop a beer with this hop, and the beer tastes like it's been barrel aged. Like now you got hops that come out
They got
like
woody
oh
characteristics to them, yeah.
yeah, woody or Manhattan. It has like a aged barrel aged cocktail kind of thing. There's another hop that I swear every time I taste it, I get tequila.
Hmm.
I'm like, how am I getting tequila from a hop? Well, I'll tell you what, don't ever underestimate
And like
hops.
the finished product as well. So it's not just yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes the fun part about brewing the hazy styles, which of course their selling point is like they're not bitter, but they're made with a lot more hops. So they have it's all about the aromatic portion of the hops. Is watching customers drink these and then say, "Are you sure you didn't put guava in here?" Or I taste peaches. You know what I mean? Like they really become convinced that you put something else in there, and you're like, "Nope. I know for a fact that there is no fruit in that beer."
I want to keep going down the hop thing, but I want to just back up just really quick though to what you were saying because we jumped from one topic to another because so much of this is personal. I think for a lot of the drinkers, and when we do see some of these M&A or these joint ventures that turn into acquisitions or whatever. There are some of the fans who sort of feel betrayed, and at the time, people are saying, "Oh, I'll never drink the beer again," or "I'll never, I'm going to boycott you guys," and all of that. And I'm reminded as we're headed into November now, a lot of the same people who screamed about Goose Island are getting ready to line up on Black Friday for their Bourbon County Stout, because the beer keeps sort of bringing them back. And I'm. As you're talking about, a brewery with history like Heineken going back to the 1300s, and you know, do you think that you had a different conversation with folks because for a long time it was AB or Miller Coors was the enemy, and folks didn't necessarily know a lot about Heineken?
Hmm.
Do you think like you were able to have a different conversation, and maybe some of the people that
Yeah, I
because
see
you're
where
a public
see
face
where
of the
you're getting
brewer,
at.
yeah.
One of my favorite phone calls. Yeah. So when that 50-50 thing was announced, there's Frank Zappa said this amazing quote, which was people will agree with you if they already agree with you. So, there were some haters that were lined up waiting to hate, and haters gonna hate. And we got a phone call from a guy that said it was like a comfortable 6 or 7 months, and he said, I just wanted to say I'm been drinking your beer for a long time, and I heard about the whole Heineken thing, and I bought a six pack, and I want you to know it still tastes great, and that's all I care about. And he hung up. And I was like, that's a reasonable person right there.
Yeah.
So, as long as the beer still tastes great and the culture is still there. And my old brewing professor, Dr. Michael Lewis at UC Davis, he used to say, there's nothing unique to a brewery other than the people or its water. Everything else is mass marketed and available to all. And if you think about it, that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
But, okay, so some people want to dig a little deeper into the conversation. And, I try to call out certain things like that are actually true. Like Heineken is a family-owned company still. So the Heineken family, so their last name is Heineken, controls or owns the majority of the company. And in that sense, they are the world's oldest family-owned brewer. And that kind of works for some people, but others still want to keep kind of pushing you. So I'm like, all right, how about this? Lagunitas, who the only brewery to be shut down for cannabis in 2005.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Collaboration with the Waldos. Now our centralized location is Amsterdam. How about that? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, Amsterdam. We all know what goes on in Amsterdam, right? They've had coffee shops and they tolerate. And it's been fun digging into why the Amsterdam and Holland, why they are so tolerant. And I've actually learned this, from our friends at Heineken, is they say, well, if you walk through our history, Europe is very, very crammed. It's a lot of different cultures and countries crammed together in a tight space. They say, like, we were always like invaded. They were just constantly invaded, constantly cultures coming in, cultures going out, and over time they kind of like learned to be tolerant because they were being invaded all the time. And I thought about that, and I was like, that's really cool. So I often offer that strange strange argument against the craft beer guy that's like, nope, I don't. You're owned by a big guy, and I don't like you anymore. And just try to say, can you see this from a human perspective, that we are still all humans, and we're just trying to brew the most delicious beer that we can. And part of brewing delicious beer is occasionally being kind of recognized for that, right? So, but now there's been such a flurry of M&A and all of that. That's why I was kind of arguing that the us and them is, to me, that was so kind of like when I first started doing this, like almost 2 decades ago. There was a really strong sense of like us and them, or in other words, the scrappy home brewers that decided to become craft brewers versus the world's big lager brewers.
Yeah.
And then now it's like it's been all thrown into a crock pot and turned into a new stew.
Thinking about the 2005 or thereabouts, and there was a sort of, I don't know, rock and rollness to, craft beer and doing something against the mainstream and, avant-garde and all of that. Has there been a maturity, do you think, since those days? Because there's a vibe that a brewery gets into, but if you want to grow a business, like, you do have to change. You do have to become more mature. And I'm curious, like, what that looks like for you guys.
Well, I just got to appreciate the fact that you used the music analogy there, because we used to joke that working at a craft brewery was like having a band. They were equally things that would compete with your resources that you had available for your wife or girlfriend. and then it was, so starting a craft brewery is very much like starting a band. And as bands either glory days it until they fizzle. Everybody gets gets married and has kids, and the band practices and gigs get harder to do, or they, as you said, they mature, right? And then the analogy keeps going, because sometimes fans will stop listening to a band that they really like as soon as they hear them on the radio, so to speak.
Right.
I don't know if people,
Still
if the
listen to
radio
the
is still a
radio?
thing.
No,
I
I
think
don't
it's
think
all
so.
online now, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean, if they become kind of mainstream, so to speak. So there is something to that idea that people are inclined to want to feel special, and then part of feeling special is liking the secret thing, right? Like, I like this thing, and I discovered it, and nobody else knows about it, so it's really special to me. Um, so that's kind of that discovery element. But I mean, to your question, absolutely, you have to you have to like, think of everybody that you went to high school with, and
I try
there's
not to,
probably
but
that
yeah.
one guy that is stuck exactly the way that they were when you were in high school, like
Yeah.
you like doing the exact same thing, um,
They're a
it's
Springsteen
great.
song. Yeah.
That's a great guy to go and have a couple of beers with, and glory days it up, and feel like have that warm and fuzzy feeling of nostalgia. But for the most part, everything needs to evolve and grow, and kind of, things will change. And part of all of those words alludes to a maturing of sorts. And I do feel that the craft brewing industry, as well as Lagunitas, has kind of matured. And to that extent, I also do get excited when I go and visit my friends and former brewers who have started small little scrappy breweries. And I walk around, and you see the sights of a struggling brewery, and I remember it very, very well. Not even being able to buy a box of clamps, because you couldn't even spend that much money. It was like crazy things, to pay your struggling to pay all your bills. I remember that so well, and I also don't miss it. Um, but at the same time, I think you can see kind of all of the industry maturing, especially with 2020 and all of the challenges that it's kind of presented. I am proud of our industry with how many people are marching full steam ahead with planned openings.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many people that are like, oh, the time to buy is when there's blood in the streets. Like, now is the perfect time to be working on my business plan. However, I would also argue that it is gone are the days of opening up a brewery and making 20 hazy beers and reaching your 5-year plan in your first year or two,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that was also a thing. And so that's part of that maturity, is realizing that we're here to stay. Craft is not a flash in the pan, and neither is IPA. People are going to continue to want these beers. Is it going to overtake lager as the world's currency beer? I'd like to believe the answer is still maybe, but it's not going to happen fast.
Yeah.
As we all know, our beers have problems. Hops are the spirit that inhabits a fresh beer. So as you know, you could have a 6-pack of IPA. You could drink one the day you get them, and it tastes great. And you could drink one 3 months later, and it's like,
It's
where
fallen
did
off a
some of the
bit.
hops go? And then you could drink one 6 months later, and you're like, wait, where did the hops go? You know what I mean? Whereas like a lager beer, it didn't have much going on the day you got it, and guess what? It might not have much going on 6 months later either. There's just less to go wrong. So, our beers are unique in that they, I think they're, the analogy is kind of like the farmer's market phenomenon, or the foodies that go to the farmer's market. You go to get a moment of now. I want to get what's in season and fresh right now, and I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to make an amazing meal that celebrates the month of April or the month of October, right?
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, our beers are kind of doing the same thing. The one outlier is barrel aged beers, right? That I like to joke like barrel aged beers are already old, so they're perfect for aging because they were old when you got them.
Yeah. So what's a little bit more time? Um,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious though to sort of talk about and stay on this maturity theme as
Hmm.
well because as so going back to 2005, when Lagunitas became, I think, like a brewery of legend because people were like, oh man, they got shut down by the feds. Like this was a big story at the time, and it remains, I think, in the general consciousness of folks to this day, and it becomes like that really great party story, and it becomes the like, man, you guys are a bunch of badasses, and the marketing behind it was brilliant afterwards as well. The beer's named after it, and it sort of became
Well, as Tony used to say, do
Tony
the
McGee, the
crime,
founder.
do the
Yeah.
time, get the bragging rights. And but it was genuinely scary when to be here during that and to see guys dressed in all black with machine guns running around the brewery. And I didn't know if I was going to have a job the next day. I mean, it was really scary, and it was over a joint. I mean, it was pretty nuts, and absolutely, we have matured a lot. We would never go back. The spot where that happened is now our tap room, where customers can sit and enjoy beers. And because we are a legal rec state, sometimes customers, uh, they forget the law, and they might like do the thing that got us in trouble.
Uh huh.
They might like light up, and like we have matured to the point where we have to go over and say, whoa, what are you doing? You're risking our license, and because we remember that so well. And so we matured to the point of, you know, following the evolution of at least cannabis, and then figuring out how to do that completely within the guardrails, with hi-fi. And I think hi-fi is a great nod to how we have matured, because it's the whole way uh, that it's handled is by the state law. It's legal within, it's legal by all of the
Yeah,
California
I
laws.
was going to say for those who are not familiar with that particular beer, can you give a little bit of the background on it?
So hi-fi hops is an infused, either CBD or THC or some sort of blend of that. There's three different iterations. Um, Sparkling hop water, so it's not a de-alc
Right.
beer that's has the alcohol removed, and then it has cannabinoids added. It is not that. It is a sparkling hop water, no calories, no gluten. Um, Smells and tastes, kind of like, well, like hops. And then we make it here. We put it, and then we don't add the cannabinoids here. We then transfer that to our partners in Santa Rosa, to Canacraft, and then they infuse it, they bottle it, and then they distribute it.
Right.
So it's a
And
it's
my
a really
apologies
clear
for
line in the
calling it a
sand.
beer. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
got
and
ahead of
it's
myself there.
technically it's not a beer, but it very much drinks like a beer and looks like a beer, and kind of, it's just the idea is all about like inclusivity. There's a lot of people that for whatever reason they don't drink anymore, or they never did drink, but they enjoy cannabis. So it was about kind of embracing, especially here in Northern California. This is like a epicenter of cannabis culture, epicenter of Grateful Dead culture.
Yeah.
Um, so it was about kind of embracing that little side of ourselves, and also continuing what started in 2005, but in a mature way, and also a little bit of slight stick it to the man, because it's like saying, guess what? We were on the right side of history back then when that happened.
There's been a relationship between craft and cannabis for quite some time, and I think that there have been brewers like you guys who have been trying to bridge the gap. To bring one product into another, and even though we're not necessarily talking about a beer here, we are talking about an infused beverage, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the future of this collaboration? Is it in one product? Is it separate but together? How do you see the evolution of?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, if you just back up a little bit, it's important to understand that there's these similarities that exist in two ways. We both share prohibition,
Mm-hmm.
and prohibition is prohibition, and we all know what came out of it. And I would argue that cannabis is emerging out of prohibition right now, and it's going to go even faster because of COVID, and a lot of state and local and municipal governments being, for lack of a better way to put it, cash strapped, and wanting to move this along as something to tax. So shared prohibition, and then also, but we can't overlook the unique kind of botanical relationship between hops and cannabis as botanical cousins. So they share a lot of kind of organoleptic, and they share a lot of properties. You could argue they're both terpene factories, whereas hops make alpha acids, whereas cannabis makes cannabinoids. But
Mm-hmm.
under a microscope, a trichome and a lupulin gland look excitingly similar and analogs. So, I used to speak about this a lot back when there were conferences, either in the cannabis space or in the
I
brewing
remember
space.
conferences.
I miss them. But I thought that there would be a lot of aspiring brewers that may jump into that space and lend their expertise. Um, uh, there could be also the reverse of that, so where you kind of have an osmosis of people. Um, I don't think that there will ever be legal products that have both alcohol and cannabinoids, or THC in particular. I just don't think that anybody is ready for that, nor does it really make any sense, because you end up with a truly,
Well, yeah. So talk to me about that. That it doesn't make sense, because that, to me, when I have conversations with folks, it seems like that's the dream,
yeah, it's always been a dream, but those
but the
are,
reality isn't there.
yeah, uh, we've all had a friend that was maybe didn't smoke, and had some beers, and then had a puff, and then ended up on the gravitron. Like you wouldn't want to be doing that to people. So I just feel like people can choose to do. I like to borrow a line from my dad. My dad's a doctor, and I used to joke, you prescribe legal drugs, and then I went into the bev alc business, and I feel like I do something similar. And then my friends over in the cannabis industry, they feel like they're similar to you. They feel like they're really providing medicine for people, right? This is, and my dad would say, people will just reach for whatever's around them, and you kind of can't stop it. So I would say to the people that want both in one product, they can reach for one and then the other separately on their own terms and their own privacy, right? Uh, I've heard about, at one point I heard about some countries like over in Europe that were allowing such products, but I haven't really researched it enough to know if that's real or not. But
Yeah.
I do think that we live in an exciting time where the analogy would be like if we were to take what happened when the 21st Amendment was passed, which led to the the three-tier system, and the mature bev alc system that we see now that I was arguing earlier has done a really amazing job during 2020, during the pandemic, of not having the supply chain break. Whereas you can't say the same thing for like cleaning supplies, toilet paper. I mean, I went to the store the other day, they're still out of stuff, yet I can go over to the beer aisle and find the beer that I want, which is amazing. You know, it's done such a good job. So that system is kind of like forming and coalescing right now as we speak within the cannabis industry. They're going to
Yeah.
go from this thing that was under prohibition to it'll probably maybe get rescheduled, right? So it won't be Schedule One, and then it's going to open up this idea, whether or not it's individual states or if it's federal. We're going to see kind of like what happened after the 21st Amendment, that's going to happen for cannabis. And it's going to happen during our lifetime. So it's exciting. It's genuinely exciting to watch it happen. And to that extent, I do see, and I'm already seeing, for a good example, our current our new CMO came over from the cannabis industry. And she was BevAlc before that. So there's a lot of kind of, osmosis and reverse osmosis already happening between the two industries, finding what they can learn from one another, and realizing that the world of regulation and just, intense regulation. The BevAlc industry is intensely regulated. That is going to be what is coming over to our friends on the other side.
What I'm curious about is if you don't necessarily think there'll be a complete marriage of the two into one beverage of cannabis and alcohol in one. Part of the maturity that we're seeing in the marketplace right now, is the beverages that don't get you messed up. Or don't actually cause, any of the traditional effects, and the non-alcoholic space is continuing to grow. And you mentioned it very briefly earlier on in our conversation, but I want to come back to it because it seems like there's genuine excitement among brewers who are now wading into non-alcoholics, and I find that fascinating that there is excitement there, because this is something that people were not jazzed about even a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's so if you look at the rest of the world, a lot of this is governed by drinking and driving laws. And if you look at Europe, there are many countries where the legal limit is 0. So in other words, you can't drive or operate machinery after one sip of beer, let alone a super boozy IPA, right? So so that has led to a very, very mature market of tasteful and flavorful NA. It's quite developed, and it represents a pretty broad spectrum. It used to be, I know when my wife got pregnant, I got her a 6-pack of the most commonly available mass-produced NA beer available in the grocery store.
Wow, you sound like a terrible husband.
Oh, yes, I know. But let me tell you this. I still have the other 5 bottles that she couldn't drink.
I was gonna say,
I promised my son that I will give those to him, and he can pass those down to his son, and so forward it will go. That's how terrible it was.
That's a generational promise. I like that.
It's a generational promise, and I bet the flavor will improve. But what's kind of happened is the United States is opening up. And then more importantly, it used to be that the craft brewers needed really, really, really expensive dealcoholizing machines that kind of cooked the alcohol out of the beer. And then you were left behind with like a cooked beer. And I don't know about you, but, when I homebrew, I'm cooking, and that's the only time I want to cook. You can only cook beer once, so to speak. But then the technology improved, and they got to, gentle, more kind of like vacuum distillation technology, but this is like way out of reach for your average scrappy home brewer. And then enter yeast companies that are offering yeasts that don't ferment maltose and maltotriose. So in other words, they make a beer, but they don't make the alcohol. And so those yeasts are relatively newly available to craft. So part of it is the availability of the yeast coinciding with the emerging trend, right? So it's a perfect mix of the right thing at the right time at the right place. And people are more health conscious. And they were already getting more health conscious before the pandemic, but
Yeah.
once the pandemic hit, everybody became health conscious plus, kind of biophobes. Like I was having a talk with some friends, and we were all like with our masks on, like, when was the last time does anybody remember getting a cold? Like, what's a cold? I forgot all about what that's like. It's a kind of a little bit disturbing if you think about it.
Oh, I
Like,
don't know, man. I have a
what are those
toddler,
colds
so
doing?
yeah,
Are they sitting in a room like plotting right now? But it's people are
it's a
definitely were
virus
getting.
conspiracy that you're floating. I like that.
I have a vivid imagination.
Clearly.
But maybe I watched too many Simpsons episodes growing up. But which I guess there's no such thing as too much
No,
Simpsons.
I was
But
gonna say, well, not the early years at least, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. But people were getting more health conscious, and then um, definitely the pandemic has accelerated that. So you see a lot of interest in the NA style, and then a big knock on it was, but I've had that and I didn't like it. I didn't think it tasted good. And then now all of a sudden you have all these new entrants and existing craft brewers like Lagunitas with our IPNA that's coming out in time for dry January.
okay.
Um, all kind of offering what I would call a more flavorful um, offering, that something that where you're not forsaking something where you can tell yourself, I'm drinking a beer, right? It tastes like beer. It's got some hops, it's got some malt. Um, you can't really brag to your friend that you're drinking carbonated notebook paper.
Right. So how long were you spending to develop this, right? Because to hear you say it, like, if you're going to put the name on it and you guys are known for, a certain flavor profile and you have a
We like to
certain.
say a hop stamp.
Okay.
We're known for the Lagunitas hop stamp.
But you can't just, I would imagine you can't just phone this in.
No, it took a very, very long time. It took a lot more time than a regular normal beer, which is why I think all of the brewers and myself included we're very, very excited by our next new beer offering, that because we've been working so hard on IPNA. But to answer your question, the prototype went on in the tap room in February, the day before we closed the tap room for the pandemic. Um, it was
It's
pretty
ominous, man.
pretty remarkable. And then that was just like uh, we have a guy, Mark, who works in specialty, who like alchemy is his thing. So he likes to just like throw things together based on pure hunches and wizardry. And so he did what, in his own words, what's called proof of concept. And then to commercialize a lot of his stuff involves a pure world of pain. So we spent the entire from February all the way to like this month or last month, kind of working on the ladder. Like, how do we make this not as a 5 barrel or 10 barrel, proof of concept. And so in a certain sense, it took a lot more work, and it challenged everybody in unique ways. But the really, really fun part is that it brought a lot of different departments together in a way that just a normal beer, uh, hadn't done, because there needed to be so much extra communication
Mm-hmm.
and so much extra care, because NA is very, very unforgiving. If you get one thing wrong, there's no blending opportunity. And blending is typically every brewer's best friend. you can always save a beer until you can no longer blend it. But with NA, there's nothing to blend it with. So one mistake, and it is off to the wastewater treatment plant, and that makes me sad. So because we want to feed it to humans, not bugs.
Yeah.
So even though brewing is all about bugs, oh man, it's always fun to explain yeast to someone that doesn't really even know how beer and alcohol is made. It's like you sometimes you can tell it gets them icky sticky. They don't want to think about the yeast. They don't want to think about this little single-celled fungus.
I can't relate to that. Yeah. There's so much more I want to go down different paths with you on, but I'm mindful of your time, so I hope you come back again and we can go deep dive into hops one of these days. But
let's. Hit me up anytime, unless you got something burning that you want to close out with.
What's the hop you're most excited about that you went through during selection this year?
Oh man, that's a really tough question because this was the first year that I actually didn't go to selection. I was gonna drive up there, but it was very sadly I didn't. But we do bring in tons and tons and tons of wet hops.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been told we're the world's largest consumer of wet hops. And so I got to see bins of all of the ones that go into Born yesterday. This year's Born yesterday. I don't know if you've had it yet, but it is all of our faves. So tons of Simcoe. Simcoes were looking really nice this year. Mosaic, Citra, and Sabro.
I like that you're just naming all of the hops. I asked for one, and you're just going through the catalog.
I'm just naming them all. But you know what? I do have some hops that lesser explored hops that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
There's a new one from New Zealand called Hort 4337 that has some interesting characteristics. We're finally to get our hands on some of the small coveted New Zealand hops like Riwaka and stuff like that we're doing some specialties with. There's an Australian hop called HPA 016 that is interesting. There's a new hop out of France called Elixir that we really like. I mean, you've really I don't know what you probably don't want to try to close me on hops because we could go for another hour. The wonderful world of hops. I definitely am always partial to the Pacific Northwest and all of the great breeding programs that are going on up there. Just amazing work, but also very happy to see similar work coming out of some of the other Southern Hemisphere. So you got, you got South Africa, you've got New Zealand, and you've got Australia. And the only real difference is between Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere, besides terroir, is that there's just a lot less land down there. So most of the hops tend to be grown in the Northern Hemisphere because we've got more land.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's something really, really magical. Our brew pub in Seattle Dan there, he does a Northern Hemisphere fuzz, New England style, brewed with all Pacific Northwest, and then he likes to put alongside it a Southern Hemisphere fuzz. And so it's just like what you would think. It's all South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia.
Yeah.
And
are you getting a lot of the South African hops?
What is that?
You have access to a lot of the South African hops?
Yeah. There's a small, actually a local supplier in Napa that's been able to get. They're real expensive.
Yeah.
And I think that helps keep them more available. And they are, the supply has been increasing. So hops like there's a Southern Tropic, Southern Passion. There's a bunch of numbered varietals that we're really excited about. I found that the general public can't get as excited about numbered varietals, especially when I can't even remember the number. So the best part about a hop is watching them, go to grade school or kindergarten, grade school, high school, and then they go to college, and then they graduate and they get a name. And One thing us craft brewers do is we like to be the person that gets to name a hop. So haven't quite gotten there yet, but I've planted a lot of seeds. So if I ever want to retire and rest on my laurels, hopefully I will have named a hop. But turns out that's a very big political process. That's hard to. I don't think they want to let craft brewers name hops because we do come up with really dumb names.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to be a Hoppy McHopface or something like that. So.
Oh yeah. It's going to be. So my oldest joke was some of these hops that are coming out now, like Nelson and Citra, Mosaic. They're so loud and they're so good that the brewers don't even have to be good anymore. You can just shovel these hops into your beers, and the beers will turn out instant crowd pleasers.
I like that you called that a joke, but now it's
no, it's really true.
Yeah.
I mean, you can hide a lot of you can hide a lot of things if you dry hop at 3 pounds per barrel. So I joked with a breeding program up in Yakima that I want, if you ever have a hop that's so like intense and so amazing that like it is just like Citra 5.0, I want you to name it Auto Tune. So that could be, let's just see within the next 5 to 10 years if we get, it's a New England Pale Ale brewed with super boring Citra, super boring Mosaic, but it's also got 3 pounds per barrel of Auto Tune.
I can't log on to my Untapped as I'm talking to you to fact check, but I imagine that there is a beer already out there called Auto Tune. But yeah, there's got to be a few.
We have a game we like to play, which is try to come up with a beer name that doesn't exist. And I mean, next time you're sitting with some friends, try it. It's a lot of fun. You just, first thing that rolls off the top of your head,
there's a beer name for it already.
And there's a beer name. Like you look out the window. All right, what do I see? I see a license plate. All right, type in license plate lager or your license plate beer, and then something pops up. Whatever first thing you see or first thing you can think of in your head,
Well, anybody who wants to play along and send an email into the show, they should. Jeremy, I'll have you back on before you get to name your own hop, I imagine. So, but in the meantime, thanks for sitting down and thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Always love talking about beer.
That's Jeremy Marshall, the brewmaster of Lagunitas. And a reminder that dry January is only 2 months away. Prepare accordingly. And if you're curious about South African hops, by the way, you should check out our friends over at BYO Magazine. They're at byo.com, and there's been some hop coverage in the magazine lately that can help you get a little deeper into the cool hops coming out of South Africa. And also check out the BYO Nano podcast each month and Steal This Beer every Monday. Plus, there's the Beer Edge podcast hosted by Andy Crouch. So there's a lot to check out audio-wise in beer these days. What beer name have you come up with your friends during a recent drinking Zoom? Who do you want to hear from on the show? And what's exciting you in beers these days? You can drop me a line at John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or you can join the conversation on Twitter at John_Holl. Nate Schweber does the music. He's got a new album out called Gaps that you should check out and download at nateschweber.bandcamp.com, and Jeff Quinn made our logo. I'm John Holl. Thanks so much for listening. New episodes of this show come out every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.